So, how many times over the years have you heard someone explain a training concept that makes a lot of sense when they explain it, but the reality is it turns out it's not actually true, and it's not even based upon reality, and sometimes it's not even based upon common sense? And I'll give you guys some examples of what I mean. And the whole point of this is that it's important for us to sit back and critically think training ideas that people put out for us and ask the question of, is this particular training concept even responsible for that person's results? Because oftentimes a person will get great results with something, but you need to understand there are sometimes a dozen or more different factors involved, and this one training concept might actually be costing them results, but they're getting so much other stuff right that it still works out. And one example that comes to mind, I had someone who I knew, it's not that long ago, it was last year. She was training for MMA. And her trainer, who happened to be someone she was very, very close to, who was a personal trainer who took over her weightlifting for her and coached her on her weightlifting. And she basically is like, the way it was explained to me is that we need to train with all dumbbells, right? I need to train with dumbbells exclusively because I have some possible left to right imbalances in my body. And it makes a lot of sense that if you train with dumbbells, everything gets loaded evenly in your body and everything will balance out on your left and right side. So ultimately, this individual had dropped all of their barbell work, getting ready to compete in MMA. So no barbell power cleans, no barbell squats, no barbell front squats, all these exercises that are tremendously helpful for athletes who need speed and power through their full body got dropped for dumbbell movements because it had been explained to her that it makes sense. And she said, yeah, it just makes sense. Well, the reality of that is that's not even true. The exact same problems that cause muscle imbalances with a barbell will be replicated by a person who trains with dumbbells also. It's because people shift to the side, they grind, they don't create stability when they train. So let's say on your bench press or your overhead press, you shift under the bar when you grind so that it gets easier on one side than the other. That's what causes it. And you know what? If you put someone under a pair of dumbbells who grinds that way with bad technique that creates one side getting bigger and stronger than the other, they will replicate the exact same movement with a dumbbell. They will do it with a dumbbell. And in fact, I've seen people do this on hammer strength machines. Once they start grinding and getting to failure, people will shift under the side of a hammer strength machine and it will load their right side harder than their left because it changes the tension and the angles. Because if they can shift a little bit to the left, they can get their body under that one side a little better. So they need a little less pec tension, a little less force from their pec to move it. And also the shifting of their body creates a leverage that moves the weight forward slightly also. So they cheat the weight up. Well, the exact same thing is how people get imbalances with barbells. So just switching to dumbbells doesn't change that. And what ultimately happens, you have less hypertrophic and less strength potential with dumbbells because you're going to spend more time stabilizing, doing unilateral work, and you're going to end up doing usually less total tonnage, sometimes through a lesser range of motion. It ultimately doesn't give you quite the same results. And particularly for a contact sport athlete like that, doing a bunch of power cleans and hang cleans and front squats and push presses with barbells, particularly for someone like that who didn't have an enormous strength base yet, it's the best thing she could have been doing. Best thing she could have been doing. But this person who she trusted as a trainer, because of their romantic involvement, said, hey, what they said makes a lot of sense. And it made sense. Yeah, because dumbbell, you've got the same weight on each side, right? It makes sense. But it doesn't. You hear the same thing when bodybuilders start talking about, I train for like blood flow, like I get blood volume training. Because if you train with a bunch of 20 rep sets, it traps a bunch of blood in the muscle and it causes it to stretch the muscle fascia. And you see Muscle fascia limit muscle growth. And that's the thing. If you accept that fact that that's what causes people to have limited muscle growth, that yeah, it's the fascia on the end of the muscle fibers that's limiting muscle growth. If you accept that false reality, that false premise, then you can be made to believe all sorts of crazy stuff. You know, we can go back to the same thing with the dumbbell analogy. If you honestly believe that it's the individual weights on each side that are causing it, which isn't the case. I mean, if you've got 345s on each side of the barbell, the same weight's on the bar. If you grip the bar evenly, you've got the same weight. It's just a matter of you keeping it stable. But if you accept that reality that, oh yeah, it's just easier to have less weight on one side, when the reality is it's not. With the dumbbells, they move more freely, and it's even easier to unload the side even more unevenly than it is with a barbell. But if you accept that premise, then you can be made to believe all sorts of absurd stuff. And we could take that the step further. Take something like this, the whole blood volume training thing that was in all these bodybuilding magazines 10, 15 years ago. That if you can do stuff to stretch the muscle fascia out, it will cause more muscle growth. As if that's what's causing any sort of limit. There's never been any research or indication or even basic human physiology that would suggest that that's true. But that's the thing. The moment you accept a false premise, you can be convinced that something makes sense. Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And how often do you hear someone say that? It just makes sense. Well, it makes sense if you accept the bullshit notion being put forward first. In this case, that muscle fascia are what limit muscle growth. No, that's not what limits muscle growth at all. And if that was the case, then how do people get massive who don't do anything about their muscle fascia? There's tons of people who get massive just from lifting weights. There's tons of people who use a bunch of drugs and get massive too. Those muscle fascia don't seem to be getting in the way. And there's also people who have muscle imbalances who train almost exclusively with dumbbells in their upper body still. So that's the thing. We run into problems when we start accepting absurd concepts, because as soon as we accept a single unproven concept, that concept can be built upon. It can be built upon, and we can be taught absurdities. And we will believe absurdities because they make sense based upon that original false set of information. And that's why it's important that we try to be objective with this stuff. And you know what? I even told something that's slightly wrong there. Is it that important that we have to be objective? Maybe if you're trying to glean that last 1%, that last 2% of your results. But the truth is, there are tons of people who reach most of their genetic potential without thinking about this stuff at all, isn't there? There are people who come in and just train really, really hard and eat well and get decent nutrition and train really hard for many years, who get fantastic results, who don't even think about these things at all. They're just consistent and they train hard. They still get pretty good results, don't they? So, we could argue that maybe we don't even need to do that. And that might be a fair point as well. But I would postulate that if you're trying to get the most results possible out of your time, that it is important to step back and rethink these things. And don't just accept something at face value. Question it. Look at it. Analyze it. Because it could be wrong. I could say something that's wrong, and I have said things that were wrong and have gone back and realized it later and corrected myself. It happens. Sometimes the people giving you advice or giving you information are wrong. And sometimes people's belief in what gave them their results is actually wrong. It's like, I tried this and it worked. It's like, wait a minute, you tried lifting weights and you gained muscle and strength? Well, no, I tried this specific thing. But we need to go back to the point. You did resistance training and you ate enough food and got enough sleep to grow on, and you gained muscle and strength. Maybe it wasn't their magical method at all. And in some cases, maybe it was the drugs they used while using this magic method. But the thing is, just because someone else tried something doesn't mean that it's going to work. And just because something can be explained in a way that seems to make sense also doesn't make it true in the absence of real evidence. And that's the hard part sometimes, and that's the struggle that all of us go through, myself included, of sometimes it's really hard to find the right information. Sometimes it's really hard to get things right. And the exercise science and sports sciences is a field that's still evolving, it's still growing, and there's a lot still to be learned about it. And at the end of the day, all we can do is do the best that we can to be logical, to be rational, to look at evidence. And sometimes that will require anecdote, but sometimes we need to step back and look at that anecdote even and say, okay, is this really the reason this person got the results? And we have to ask that about ourselves as well sometimes, don't we? Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.